Welcome back, everyone, to the 3 Minutes on My Clock podcast. Today we have another NBA mock draft, and believe it or not, the draft is this Thursday. Time really does fly. I don't know how it's this week, but it is. So my plan is I'm definitely going to have another mock sometime next week, probably on Thursday. Probably going to release my big board. Definitely going to grade all of the drafts as well. Then after that, I don't know if I'll upload any other NBA draft content. I might, but we'll see. So without further ado, let's get right on into it. This draft is 2 rounds, and there are trades. I actually only added 1 trade. I promised my last mock we'll have a bunch of trades. I was just sort of in a rush making it. So with the first pick, the Pelicans select Zion Williamson out of Duke University. This comes to the surprise of absolutely no one, as Zion Williamson is the obvious pick here, and there's going to be no suspense on Thursday night. We all know that Zion is headed to New Orleans. He is such a phenomenal player, obviously an explosive athlete, but he's also a versatile defender, pretty solid facilitator, and just a dominant presence inside. So other than his jump shot, he is a complete player, and his jump shot isn't even that bad. It's just not great, and if he can develop that, he could easily be a legit MVP candidate in 3 years. With the second pick, the Memphis Grizzlies select Ja Morant, point guard, Murray State. As this pick seems pretty set in stone, he will be Mike Conley's replacement, whether Conley mentors him, or I think the more likely option of Mike Conley being traded away, as Ja Morant is a very talented player. I like RJ Barrett a tad bit more. However, this is not a bad pick at all for the Memphis Grizzlies. Morant is a great player, especially offensively. He can score the basketball from all 3 levels of the court. Very athletic, phenomenal playmaker, and is a decent defensive player as well. I see a lot of John Wall in Ja Morant, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Obviously, John Wall is a great player, but you can't really build a championship contender around him. That's my big concern. However, Ja Morant will have a very talented young player alongside him in Jaren Jackson. John Wall did not have any one of Jaren Jackson's potential when he got picked. I think Jaren Jackson will be an all-star in no time. I absolutely love his skill set, and I think Jaren Jackson and Ja Morant will be a really nice duo for a long time. With the third pick, the New York Knicks select RJ Barrett, shooting guard out of Duke, as he can play 2 and the 3. Easily the best player on the board. He has a ton of upside. Very solid scorer. Inconsistent at times, especially from 3. However, he showed a ton of potential at Duke. Ton of potential in high school as well. And he's an all-around extremely talented player. And this is definitely the right choice for the Knicks. He could end up being traded to New Orleans, or if the Knicks trade for a different superstar. But for right now, I think he's going to stick around. The fourth pick, of course, belongs to the Los Angeles Lakers, but I have a trade, and this pick is going to the New Orleans Pelicans. I think we all see where this is going. Anthony Davis will be shipped to the Lakers in exchange for the fourth pick, Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, and Kyle Kuzma. I think that is way too much for the Lakers to give up. I think that's an absolute L for them. I know they don't want to trade Kyle Kuzma. The report is the current offer from them is Lonzo, Ingram, and the fourth pick. The Pelicans want Kuzma, and personally, I think the Lakers will be desperate enough to trade Kuzma. And for the Pelicans, I don't think this is an outstanding haul. However, I think this is a good trade for New Orleans and a bad trade for the Lakers. I think Anthony Davis is a tad bit overrated. I don't think he's a superstar. I think he's a top 10 player in the league, but I definitely think he's at the bottom part of that top 10, maybe 8 or 9, as everyone's like, oh, he's a one-man team. Last year he had Julius Randle and Drew Holiday, who are both borderline all-stars. So, yeah. I think Anthony Davis is a tad bit overrated, but he's still a great player and can be a great second fiddle alongside LeBron James. Meanwhile, the Pelicans select Jarrett Culver out of Texas Tech with this pick. I'm not as high on Culver as others. He's probably going to be at the bottom part of the top 10 on my personal big board. I do think he's a good player. Solid 3-and-D guy. Didn't really perform that great in the Final Four, which is why I have someone like DeAndre Hunter higher than him on my personal board. But Culver is a safe pick, and the Pelicans need help with their wing spots. And I think getting a safe pick at 4 makes a ton of sense, as there's not really that guy other than maybe Bol who has insane potential, and it makes sense to go with someone like that here. So I think Jarrett Culver does make sense with this selection. With the fifth pick, the Cleveland Cavaliers select DeAndre Hunter, small forward or power forward out of the University of Virginia. In my latest mock drafts, this has been the common pick, Hunter to Cleveland. I almost had Hunter at 4. However, the Pelicans already have Zion. If they can keep Julius Randle, and I feel like forward isn't a gigantic need for them. So he's going to come to the Cleveland Cavaliers. I think a safe pick for them makes sense. Once again, there's not that many boomer bust guys here in this situation. They have Colin Sexton, who I thought was going to have an incredible rookie year. I had him winning Rookie of the Year at the beginning of the season. And while he wasn't bad, he definitely had a really good second half of the season. He wasn't as good as I thought he would be, but he still can be a really solid player, and I think a very nice building block for them. But other than that, they could use pretty much anything else. So Hunter is probably the best player on the board in most people's opinions, and I don't know if he'll be 4th on my overall big board, but I do think he's a really solid player, phenomenal shooter, excellent defender. I think he's a better shooter than Jarrett Culver. I think he's a better defender than Jarrett Culver. More upside, I think. More athletic. And he definitely showed up in the Final Four, hit the big 3 in the national championship for Virginia. And I think he's going to be a really good player in the NBA. With the 6th pick, the Phoenix Suns select Darius Garland, point guard Vanderbilt. As obviously point guard is a glaring need for the Phoenix Suns. I think they could look to acquire someone like Lonzo Ball. Obviously he is now with the New Orleans Pelicans, and I mentioned how the Pelicans don't need forwards because they have Zion and Randle. I totally forgot I had them getting Ingram and Kuzma, so that's my bad. Anyway, the Suns need a point guard. Lonzo Ball is now off the table, so I assume they're going to draft someone here, and they have their choice between Coby White and Darius Garland. Personally, I would choose Coby White. However, I think the pick will be Garland. I think Garland does have a tad bit more upside. However, he only played like 3 games last year, and his stock rose because the rest of his draft class had a disappointing season. At least most of these guys did. So it's not really Garland's fault, and the injury, honestly, I think helped his stock a little bit. At the beginning of the year, he was not a top 10 prospect. He was like a top 15, top 20 guy, but I don't think he was this high on most people's boards. But Garland is a really solid athlete, explosive scorer, and we obviously have a small sample size with him, making him a huge risk. However, I think the Suns do have some very solid pieces, and even if this pick sort of strikes out a little bit, I think the Suns still have a pretty solid future. With the 7th pick, the Chicago Bulls select Coby White, point guard UNC. I think Coby White is a safer pick, which I think is why the Suns should take Coby White. I think Coby White is a better prospect as well. Solid scorer, inconsistent at times, but he's a pretty good passer, pretty solid shooter, pretty solid defender, and I feel he's an all-around solid player. Bulls' current point guard is Chris Dunn, who is an excellent defender, but is a liability on offense. So they're going to get White, who isn't quite the defender, but he's an effort giver, 110% each day, hard worker, and I think he's going to be a very successful player in the NBA. With the 8th pick, the Atlanta Hawks select Cam Reddish, forward from Duke. Cameron Reddish might be the most polarizing player in this draft. What I mean by that is he had an incredible high school career, looked like he was going to be a top 3, top 5 pick, and he went to Duke. He was the 3rd or 4th option, and his stock sort of dropped a little bit because of that. And I think if he went to a different team where he could have been the 1st option, I think he would have been the 1st option on a team like Kentucky. I think he could have been one of the main options on a team like Kansas. I think he could have had a bigger role in pretty much any other team in the country outside of Duke. So I think that sort of hurt his stock a little bit. He's a solid player, inconsistent at times. He was a really good scorer, really good shooter in high school. And a year ago, we thought he'd be the best shooter in this draft class, or at least one of. And he's a very streaky player. And he has a ton of potential to be a Paul George, or a poor man's Paul George. I don't see him being as good as Paul George, but I think he could be a poor man's Paul George in the NBA. However, he does have a lot of work to do and needs to get consistent. And now, we have picks 9 and 10, 2 of my favorite picks in this draft. And when I say favorite, I mean probably the worst 2 picks in this draft, in my opinion. Wizards get Jackson Hayes, Hawks get Brandon Clark. And I'm not high on either of these 2, especially Clark. I think Clark is a early 2nd round prospect, Jackson Hayes late 1st, as I think Hayes does have a tad bit higher ceiling. I think Hayes has a very high ceiling. Clark has an ceiling. But I don't think either of these guys are top 10 prospects. Both of them, especially Jackson Hayes, has some durability issues, as Hayes has suffered numerous injuries in his basketball career. He won Big 12 Freshman of the Year. He only put up like 11-5, which isn't bad, but I think his stock should not have gone up as high as it has. People say he has a ton of potential, and he does. However, he has no jump shot. He cannot shoot from three. We have never seen him shoot from three, so maybe he's the next Steph Curry because we haven't seen him brick. But chances are he's not a good shooter. He is pretty athletic. He's a solid defender. He can block shots, which is great. But there aren't many players that can't shoot the ball and are solid centers. You have guys like Rudy Gobert, Andre Drummond, DeAndre Jordan, Hassan Whiteside, but some of those guys like Jordan and Whiteside aren't the same players they once were. And even looking at guys like Rudy Gobert and Andre Drummond, yeah, they're solid, but they're just players. I think Gobert is really solid, but that's just because Gobert is an insane defender, and I think Jackson Hayes does have potential to be a great defender. However, I do think he has a lot of work to do. He needs to get rebounds better. He only averaged like 5 a game, and obviously he needs to be a better offensive player. I just don't think he translates in the modern NBA that well. I think he has a lot of upside. However, I would not take him until the late first round. And then Brandon Clark, I don't know how on earth he is a top 10 prospect. He did have a great year at Gonzaga, as he was probably their second best player, at times their best player. He was extremely efficient, but that's because he only shot inside, didn't shoot from three at all. And sort of like Jackson Hayes, I feel like you need to shoot threes in the NBA. That's what this league has turned into. Brandon Clark does not do that, and I don't think he's as good of a defender as Jackson Hayes. I don't think he has the ceiling that Jackson Hayes has, and I would not pick Brandon Clark in the first round. I just don't think he should be picked that high, and there's a decent chance he gets picked in the top 10, which I think makes no sense, but I guess good luck in your career, Brandon Clark. I don't know. The Minnesota Timberwolves select P.J. Washington, power forward from Kentucky. And I've been rambling on about how I think Jackson Hayes and Brandon Clark aren't good prospects, and I think P.J. Washington is a far superior prospect than both of them. He's almost as good of a defender. He can block shots. He can grab boards. But he is a far superior offensive player, or at least I think he will be far superior in the NBA. He's a solid scorer inside, mid-range, and he can shoot the three, which I think is the biggest difference between them. And yes, shooting isn't everything. However, I think shooting might be the most important attribute now, as we see teams like the Golden State Warriors who can just shoot at will, and they've made the past 5 championships. Yeah, they just lost, but they got sort of unlucky. They kind of got screwed with Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson getting injured. I think if Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson play that whole series, I think Golden State probably wins it. So I think P.J. Washington will be a great player in the modern NBA. I think him and Karl Anthony Towns can form a really nice big man duo. With the 12th pick, the Charlotte Hornets select Nasir Little, small forward from North Carolina. Yeah, Little is not a great offensive player. However, he is an insanely good defender. He has an insanely high ceiling. And I don't hate him as much as I hate Brandon Clark and Jackson Hayes. I don't think Nasir Little is a lottery prospect. However, I don't think he's too far off. I don't think this is a crazy reach for the Charlotte Hornets. I think Little has a ton of potential. I also think he has a great chance to be a bust. He could turn into the next Stanley Johnson. Go Pistons. However, I see him sort of having a Justice Winslow-esque career, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And based on the way Winslow's been playing the past season or two, I think that's a good thing. I think Justice Winslow is a really solid player. And while Nasir Little's going to struggle offensively, he can guard the opposing team's best defender. And Hornets fans are probably not too happy. They're probably thinking, oh, this is the next Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. Technically, you're not wrong. I'm not really going to argue there. However, it's good to have talented defenders, especially since you have guys like Kemba Walker, who are not great defensively. And I think this is a solid pick for the Charlotte Hornets. With the 13th pick, the Miami Heat select Rui Hachimura, small forward, power forward, out of Gonzaga. I think Hachimura, this is the range he should go. I think he's a late lottery prospect. I don't think he's top 10, but I do think he should go in the lottery. Very solid player for Gonzaga. He can score the ball from all 3 levels, grab boards, solid defender. I don't think he has crazy potential, but I do think he has some upside. We've never seen someone like him out of Japan pretty much ever. and he is easily on pace to become the greatest Japanese basketball player of all time. And I think he can contribute immediately for the Miami Heat, and I think this is a really nice pick for them. With the 14th pick, the Boston Celtics select Sekou Doumbouya, small forward out of France. I mentioned that if Kyrie and Rozier go, I think he has the potential to play point guard in the future. Not now, obviously, but in 3-4 years down the road. That might be a little bit of a stretch. However, I do think Sekou Doumbouya has a ton of potential. Very athletic. He's very raw, but he has an extremely high ceiling. And I think this can be good for the Celtics. Just let him stay in Europe for a year or two, which I think would benefit both sides. This gives the Celtics more cap space. I think there's a chance they could sign Kyrie back. I think it's unlikely, but there's a chance. And even if not, you could re-sign someone like Terry Rozier. I don't think his price is going to be small. He's going to ask for, I think, a good $15 million a year at least. And then I think while Boston isn't being talked about as a free agent destination, I absolutely think if they have enough money to go out and sign someone, I think they can do it. Obviously, they've been linked to Anthony Davis. However, I think if they can sign someone without having to trade guys like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, I think that would be a great move for Boston Celtics. So, all around, I think this pick is really not focused on them trying to win a championship now, but really the big picture, which is definitely something that Danny Ainge thinks about. And Danny Ainge is, I think, by far the best basketball GM. The best GM in basketball. Let me rephrase that. Now, onto the non-lottery, starting with my Detroit Pistons, number 15. I have them getting Kevin Porter Jr., shooting guard out of USC. And Kevin Porter Jr. is my type of prospect. He has an incredible ceiling. There's also a good chance he could be a bust. But he's an insane athlete. He can jump out of the gym. He showed a ton of flashes at USC. Inconsistent. A little bit of question marks off the court. However, he has the potential to be a multi-time All-Star, and for a team like the Pistons, I don't think a safe pick makes sense here. I think the Pistons have to go for a risk, and Kevin Porter Jr. is definitely a risk. He has a chance to be great. He also has a chance to suck. With the 16th pick, the Orlando Magic select Romeo Langford, shooting guard, Indiana. Really good value here for the Magic. I would easily take Romeo Langford at pick 15 if I was the Pistons. Not that I'd be mad with Kevin Porter Jr., I think Romeo Langford is a fringe top 10 prospect in this draft class. I think he can sort of have a Donovan Mitchell-esque impact as a rookie. I'm not saying he'll be as good, but I think he has a similar skill set. Really good offensive player. I think Romeo Langford has a ton of similarities to Donovan Mitchell and a poor man's Kobe Bryant. I've said it in multiple mocks, and I'll say it again, as the three of them have a lot of similarities, especially on offense. They're all solid scorers, as they're all hyper-athletic athletes. They're all phenomenal drivers to the rim. Langford is an inconsistent shooter. Kobe was a solid shooter, and I think Mitchell is probably the best of the three. And defensively, they're all solid players. They're not defensive player of the year candidates, but they're not slouches. They all hold the ball too long, even though they're not point guards. They basically are the team's offense, and I think that's a role that Langford could have in Orlando, as they don't really have that guy at the guard spot, like DJ Augustine, Evan Fournier. No, Langford will be their offense next year if this is the way they go. And while I'm not saying Romeo Langford is a direct clone of Donovan Mitchell or Kobe Bryant, I'm just saying that those three have a lot of similarities in their games. Pick 17, Bruno Fernando, center out of Maryland, to the Atlanta Hawks. Hawks really focusing on the front court in this draft, getting a small forward, power forward, and center. Yeah, they have John Collins, who's a phenomenal big man, but his contract is up in 2 years. I don't know if the Hawks are going to pay him a max. I don't know if he's going to be worth a max. We're going to have to see how these next 2 years go. But if he continues to improve, I think he could be a max player. And I don't know if the Hawks are willing to do that. The Hawks may be trying to do what the Phoenix Suns did in 2016. They went after two power forwards, hoping that at least one of them would be good. Those two players were Dragan Bender and Marquise Chris. Neither of them worked out. And the Hawks, I think, are sort of doing that at center here, as they have plenty of draft capital. As Brandon Clark and Bruno Fernando are both risks, they both have upside, and there's a decent chance that one of them does not work out. There's also a chance that they could be using one or two or all three of these picks in a trade package to get an all-star. There have been rumors about them potentially trading for Blake Griffin. like pick 8 and 10 for Blake and pick 15. As a Pistons fan, I would love to do that. Blake's a great player, however, I would like to tank, and getting Cam Reddish and getting someone at 10 other than Brandon Clark, PJ Washington, we'll just say, that would make me thrilled. And I think that's easily what the Hawks could do. Pick 18, Tyler Herro, shooting guard out of Kentucky to the Indiana Pacers. I think Herro is a fringe lottery pick. Phenomenal shooter. However, he's more than that. He's an extremely explosive athlete, really good offensive player, and I think he fits the modern NBA extremely well, and I think he will have no problem adjusting. I think he could easily slide right into that shooting guard position until Victor Oladipo comes back. And even so, I think if the Pacers can get Oladipo to improve his passing, maybe make him the primary ball handler at the point guard, I think him and Herro would be a scary backcourt. Pick 19, another shooting guard out of Kentucky, this time Keldon Johnson to the Spurs. I think the Spurs could use some wing guys. Obviously, they have DeMar DeRozan, but outside of that, Rudy Gay, Bryn Forbes, it's not great. And I think Keldon Johnson could be an immediate contributor off the bench. Yeah, they just drafted Lonnie Walker last year, but he's a giant question mark. And I think both Walker and Keldon Johnson can probably both play the 3, even though they're a little bit undersized. I think Johnson is a little bit safer of a pick than Lonnie Walker. However, he does not have the upside that Lonnie has. Johnson is a solid scorer, solid all-around player in my opinion. I don't think he's as good of a prospect as Tyler Herro, hence why Tyler Herro is going before him. However, I think this is a solid pick for the Spurs. I think Keldon has more college production than Tyler Herro at Kentucky. I think Keldon was a more consistent player for them last year. However, I think this is still a solid pick for the Spurs nonetheless. Pick 20, Bol Bol, center out of Oregon of the Boston Celtics. Easily my favorite pick in this draft. I absolutely love Bol Bol. He's probably going to be top 5 in my big board. And I would assume he's all over the place on teams' big boards. He might be as high as 5, like me. And for other teams, he may be a late second-round guy. He is the biggest wild card in this draft, other than maybe Anthony Davis. He is the biggest flyer, and there's a chance he could be a multi-time All-Star. I mean, he has the potential to do it. He has the skill set to do it. Phenomenal offensive player. Put up 21 points a game for the Ducks. Really efficient. Shot the ball excellently from 3, over 50%. Obviously, that's a limited sample size, but a much higher sample size than Darius Garland, as Bol Bol played pretty much all of non-conference. And he does have some work to do. He obviously needs to bulk up. He's a twig out there. And he's going to struggle boxing out other players for rebounds. He only averaged 9 rebounds a game last year, which I think for his size he needs to improve. He needs to bulk up. He needs to get stronger. He needs to be more of a dominant force inside. And then obviously there are durability questions. Can he stay on the court for an 82-game season? And that is the biggest risk with Bol Bol. You don't know if he's going to be an injury-prone player or not. He's very injury-prone from what we've seen, and that's why he's probably not going to go top 5 or top 10. You just can't depend on him to play 82 games a season. I think he's the talent to be a multi-time All-Star, and I would take the risk if I was at like the 6, 7, 8 range. If I was a team like the Atlanta Hawks, I would easily take the risk over Brandon Clark or Jackson Hayes, and I think Bol Bol is a phenomenal prospect. However, he is a huge risk. And for the Celtics, I think it's worth it to take a risk. They're probably losing Kyrie, and Jason Tatum sort of had a down year, so I think it makes sense to go after someone with extreme potential. Al Horford's a good player, but he's not getting any younger. And in a few years from now, Horford's going to be gone. And I think if Bol Bol can be an all-star center, this Celtics team will be even scarier than ever thought. Now on to the bottom end of the first round, starting with pick 21, the Oklahoma City Thunder select Grant Williams, forward out of Tennessee. Production. That's what Grant Williams is. Not a crazy NBA prospect, but he was so good in college that he will go in the first or second round because of it. The Thunder could use depth in their front court, I feel, and I think Grant Williams would be a big addition. They have guys like Steven Adams, who's a solid center, Jeremy Grant, decent player, but I feel like they could use more behind them, and that can be Grant Williams. Pick 22, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, guard out of Virginia Tech. He can play the point as well as the 2. Obviously, point guard is a big question for the Boston Celtics in this offseason. Bol Bol obviously is no point guard. Sekou Doumbouya probably will not be a point guard on the next level. But Nickeil Alexander-Walker can do that. I think he can contribute off the bench right away. Solid 3-and-D guy, solid playmaker, all-around well-rounded player. I think he fits the modern league pretty well, and I think he'll contribute at a high level this upcoming season, whether that's off the bench or maybe the Celtics are desperate at point guard enough to start him. So I think this is a solid pick for the Boston Celtics and a great first round for them. Pick 23, Goga Bitadze, center out of the Republic of Georgia to the Utah Jazz. Yes, they have Rudy Gobert. However, Rudy Gobert cannot score the ball outside of the paint. He just can't. He's not a shooter. And he's one of the few big men in this league who are excellent who cannot shoot. He's just so gifted defensively and solid offensively. That's why he's so good. Even though I don't see Jackson Hayes and Brandon Clark being like him, there's still a chance they could be good because of guys like Rudy Gobert. Anyway, Goga Bitadze has a ton of offensive potential, decent mid-range, starting to be a three-point shooter, but he's improving. He's raw. Probably will stay in Europe for another year, as I think he should. And all around, he has a ton of potential for the Utah Jazz, whether that's as a bench guy, maybe move him to the 4. All around, pretty good prospect. Pick 24, Cameron Johnson for North Carolina to the 76ers. They just need bench help, and I think Johnson can contribute early on. Really solid player, can shoot the ball very well, and while I'm not super high on him, I think he could contribute at a high level early on. Pick 25, Matisse Thybulle, a shooting guard / small forward out of Washington, and Matisse Thybulle is a very interesting prospect. He's an excellent defender, the best defensive player in this draft. He is someone who could realistically make an all-defensive team as a rookie. He's that good. Offensively, he's not great. He did not put up 10 points a game this year for Washington, and this is basically an Andre Roberson-type player. I think he has higher defensive potential than Andre Roberson, and I don't know if he has the ceiling offensively that Andre Roberson has. Now, that doesn't say a lot because Andre Roberson is not a great offensive player, and he's a very good defensive player. And I think Matisse Thybulle could have a career similar, just a little bit different, as Thybulle gives you everything you need on ball, off ball, steals, blocks, all around really good defensive player. And the Blazers, their backcourt is very offensive oriented in CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard. So I think they could use some defense, especially off the bench. Pick 26, the Cleveland Cavaliers select Talen Horton-Tucker out of Iowa State. He is one of my favorite prospects in this draft class. Reminds me a lot of Draymond Green, as Talen is only 6'4", more of a small forward, but he's undersized for his position like Draymond. He can facilitate the offense. He can run the point. Yeah, they have Colin Sexton, but I think getting another ball handler in there who can facilitate, like Talen Horton-Tucker, could be a good asset for them. He's also a very versatile defender, like Draymond Green, as he can put him inside. He's only 6'4", so he's not going to be great inside. Solid in the perimeter as well, so all around, extremely versatile player. You can have him guarding 1s, 2s, and 3s. You can have him playing offense as a 1, a 2, or a 3, and that versatility, I think, can be great for this Cavs team. They could have a starting lineup. This would be a very small lineup of Colin Sexton, Cedi Osman, Talen Horton-Tucker, DeAndre Hunter, and I just don't feel comfortable putting Kevin Love at center, so we'll just say Tristan Thompson and Kevin Love is traded for picks. That's not a bad starting lineup at all for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Yeah, it's not going to propel them to the playoffs, but I think that's definitely a solid foundation for Cleveland. Pick 27, Luka Samanic, forward for the Brooklyn Nets, an international prospect. He's a solid guy, could go in the late first round. The Nets last year used their draft picks on 2 international forwards in Janan Musa and one of my favorite players in last year's draft class, Rorion Kurucs, who had a very good rookie season for the Nets and is in my King series, so I get to say that name a lot, which, as you all know, I enjoy. That is easily the funnest name to say in the league. But the reason why I like this pick a lot for the Nets is because they need cap space. They traded away Allen Crabbe. I think that's a good move, even though they lost a first-round pick. They got cap space, and Taurean Prince is a solid player, but this gives them more cap space to go big in free agency. Obviously, Kyrie Irving has been linked to the Nets. They also need to re-sign D'Angelo Russell. So I think Stashing Luka Samanic in Europe for a year or two, I think, could be really good. Just get them as much cap space as they can get, sort of like Sekou Doumbouya and the Boston Celtics, and I think that's a very solid pickup for the Nets. Pick 28, Mfiondu Kabengele to the Golden State Warriors. The Warriors dynasty looks like it is over. A new era in Golden State will be arriving. I think the Warriors will definitely be a playoff team next season. I think they have a chance to make the finals, but they're definitely no longer the favorites without Klay Thompson, without Kevin Durant, likely without DeMarcus Cousins. He's a giant wild card. So right now, all they got is Steph and Draymond. And I originally had Luka to Cleveland, Kabengele to Brooklyn, and Taylor Horton-Tucker here, but I feel like since they already have Draymond, what's the need for Horton-Tucker? So he goes to Cleveland, Samanic to Brooklyn, and then Mfiondu Kabengele, the big man out of Florida State, to the Warriors. They could use help at big. They have some solid depth, guys like Jordan Bell, Kevon Looney, and if Boogie goes, I could see someone like Kevon Looney starting at center next year. I think Kabengele could be a solid depth guy, pretty athletic. He was underutilized at Florida State, and his stock has really risen the past few months, and it seems like there's a very high chance of him going in round 1. Pick 29, the NBA champion Toronto Raptors select Nick Claxton, center out of Georgia. So in these past 10 picks, we've seen a center from the Republic of Georgia and now the University of Georgia. Claxton, I feel like, is very similar to Jackson Hayes and Brandon Clark. He doesn't have a jump shot, but he is pretty athletic, and I do think this is fair range for Claxton, maybe a tad bit high, but I don't see him that much of a worse prospect than Jackson Hayes and Brandon Clark, and I'm not trying to compliment Claxton. I'm just insulting Hayes and Clark because if I haven't said it 10 times, I think those two are overrated prospects. The Raptors could use some center help. Marc Gasol, not getting any younger, I believe is a free agent as well. Serge Ibaka, solid, but outside of those two, and Ibaka's not really a center, I think they could use some depth there. And then pick 30, Carson Edwards, point guard, Purdue to the Milwaukee Bucks. As outside of Giannis, this whole Bucks roster is basically a free agent. Eric Bledsoe, Malcolm Brogdon, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, Nikola Mirotic. Those are 5 of their 6 best players, all unrestricted free agents. So this Bucks team could look very different next year. And even if they remain the same, I think they could definitely use a dynamic scorer off the bench, which is exactly what Carson Edwards is. And I think the Bucks really need to go best available. I'm not saying Carson Edwards is the best available. He's definitely one of the better players available. I think he's a first-round prospect. Phenomenal scorer. He was Steph Curry in college basketball last year. To put that in, if you don't know college basketball that well, he was basically Steph Curry. Phenomenal scorer. He can change games. Will he be the next Steph Curry in the NBA? Probably not, but I think the Bucks could use some dynamic scoring off the bench. They had Nikola Mirotic coming off the bench, but they have higher priorities than Mirotic, and Malcolm Brogdon also used as a bench player at times. He's not a dynamic scorer, and he's definitely, I think, one of their higher priorities this offseason, so all around, Bucks get themselves a scorer. Could be good if all those guys go, but even if they stay, they definitely do need some scoring off of their bench. Now on to the second round. I'm going to sort of talk about these picks a lot quicker, go into less detail. So with the 31st pick, the Nets get Dylan Windler, forward out of Belmont. His stock has certainly gone up the past few months, and I think the Nets could use some scoring off of their bench. They have Spencer Dinwiddie, who's a great scorer, but outside of that, most of their scoring talent is in their starting lineup, and I think getting another one in Dylan Windler could make sense. Pick 32, Darius Bazley, forward, who played, I believe, in the G League this year. He was originally supposed to go to Syracuse, but then he signed some endorsement deal. He wanted to get paid, and he's definitely going to get drafted based on upside. We didn't get to see him in college, but he does have potential, and hopefully for the Suns he works out. They've drafted some forwards the past few years, Mikal Bridges, Josh Jackson, TJ Warren, and then Bender and Marquise Chris, and a lot of those haven't worked out. TJ Warren has, but the other ones have sort of flopped a little bit. So maybe Darius Bazley can be the one that does work out. Pick 33, Isaiah Roby, forward from Nebraska to the 76ers. Roby is a very versatile player, especially on the defensive end of the floor. He can guard almost every position, and I think the Sixers could use some perimeter defense off of their bench. Pick 34, back-to-back picks for Philadelphia. They're going to go with Daniel Gafford, center from Arkansas. They have some okay guys at center behind Joel Embiid, Amir Johnson. They picked up Greg Monroe. They have my guy Boban, but I believe all 3 of those guys are free agents, and None of them were super reliable. They didn't use Boban correctly. That man is probably the best player in the league when you put him at point guard, which is what the Sixers should have done, wink wink. But for real, Daniel Gafford, he does not shoot the ball, which is why I don't think he's a first-round prospect. I think he's solid value here early in the second round. I think he's about as talented of a prospect as Brandon Clark. Once again, not using that to compliment Gafford, but I think this is fair value for him. Pick 35, Deividas Sirvydis, small forward from Lithuania to the Atlanta Hawks. I'm not going to act like I know a lot about this guy, international player. The Hawks have 6 draft picks, so I think it might be good to not use them all on guys who are going to be on your roster this season. Pick 36, Ty Jerome, guard from Virginia to the Hornets. Ty Jerome was a very solid player this year. He can play the 1 as well as the 2. A little bit undersized for the 2, but he's a solid scorer, pretty decent playmaker. And I think he can be solid depth for Kemba Walker. Or if Kemba Walker goes, I think he could be solid depth for my guy Devontae Graham. Wink, wink. Pick 37, Joshua Oabisi, guard from Germany to the Dallas Mavericks. Once again, I don't know a whole lot about this guy. He seems pretty talented from what I've read about him. Pick 38, Chuma Okeke, forward from Auburn. He's the one who tore his ACL in the tournament for the Tigers, and I think this is a little bit high. He wasn't really on my radar throughout this season, and I've really only seen him in mock drafts now after the year with a torn ACL, so he's probably not going to be too high on my big board, but he was a talented player. He really did carry Auburn those first few games of the tournament before getting hurt. Pick 39, Kyle Guy, guard from Virginia to the Pelicans. I think Kyle Guy's a first-round prospect in my opinion. I think he's a really solid player, very productive in Virginia, can shoot the 3, can play defense, and then just the 3 throws at the end of the game against Auburn in the Final Four, he just drilled all 3 of them with pure confidence like it's nothing. Having confidence as a shooter is huge in this league, and I think I would absolutely take Kyle Guy in the first round. And then pick 40, Admiral Schofield, forward from Tennessee. He was a really solid player for the Vols, another 3-and-D guy, headed to Sacktown for the Kings. I think they could use some wing depth. They have some talented wings, Buddy Hield, Harrison Barnes, Bogdan Bogdanovic, but I think they could use an extra one, and that could be Admiral Schofield. With the 41st pick, the Atlanta Hawks are going to take Jalen McDaniels, a forward from San Diego State. McDaniels has solid potential. He's a fringe first-round, maybe early second-round guy, and we've seen forwards out of San Diego State have success in this league. Pick 42, Shamorie Ponds, point guard out of St. John's to the 76ers. The 76ers could use some dynamic scoring off the bench. They could bring back J.J. Redick and move him to that role, but I don't see them bringing back J.J. Redick and then adding another starting shooting guard. So I would assume either Redick will remain a starter or he goes. And assuming he does not come off the bench, then this pick makes a ton of sense as Shamorie Ponds is an excellent scorer and is the poor man Carson Edwards. Pick 43, Jalen Lecque, point guard out of high school. He reclassified to this draft class. I think he should have gone to NC State, which was where he would have gone, and I think he could have been a top 20 pick next year, but I guess he wants the money now. Timberwolves could use point guard. Derrick Rose, he's not the long-term guy, and obviously Jeff Teague isn't either. Pick 44, Maye Uni, shooting guard out of Yale. This guy is definitely a sleeper of mine. I think he can be really solid, very well-rounded player. He can score the basketball, he can defend, he can pass, he can grab boards. Very well-rounded player, and I think he'll do really well early on in the league. Pick 45, Lewis King, forward out of Oregon to my Detroit Pistons. We need some wing help. We probably have the worst perimeter team at shooting guard and small forward in the NBA, if not one of. And adding Kevin Porter Jr. and Lewis King certainly help. Both those two have a lot of upside, but both those two also have low floors. Pick 46, Jontay Porter, center out of Missouri to the Magic. Orlando once again going best player available, taking another huge risk in Jontay Porter. Like his brother Michael Porter, he has a ton of durability questions. 2 ACL tears, did not play all last year for Mizzou, and the injury history is definitely a cause of concern for Jontay, which is why he's falling this far, and if not, I think he would go top 20. But he's a very solid player, was really good as a freshman for Missouri, can shoot the 3, and he's a really good prospect. It's just a matter of if he can stay on the court. Pick 47, Sagaba Konate, forward, West Virginia, to the Sacramento Kings. Really good shot blocker, really solid inside defender. I think the Kings could use some more defense in the interior of their defense. Pick 48, Lou Gantz Dort, shooting guard, Arizona State, to the Clippers. He has a ton of potential and showed a lot of flashes with Arizona State. I think he's a fringe first-round guy, and I mean, he's the coolest name ever, Lou Gantz Dort. That is other than Rodion Kurucs, obviously. Pick 49, the San Antonio Spurs are going to go with my guy, Dedrick Lawson, out of Kansas, Rock Chalk Jayhawk. As Dedrick Lawson basically was the Jayhawks last year. He could score the ball, rebound, defend, shoot. Very well-rounded player. I think he has a very high floor, and I think he'll be a really solid bench player. I would say he's probably going to be early second round on my board. And then pick 50, the Indiana Pacers are going to go with Eric Paschall out of Virginia. I think this is nice value. Give themselves another shooter off of the bench. Paschall is an excellent shooter, and he's a big guy as well. I think he can continue to learn inside, but for right now, he's definitely at his best from Atlanta, far, far away. Now into the final 10 picks of this draft, starting with the Boston Celtics. They're going to go with Caleb Martin out of Nevada. Him and his twin Cody are very similar. I would say Caleb is a tad bit better. Lots of production for Nevada, and the Celtics could use someone off their bench who can provide a plug, and I think Caleb Martin has the potential of doing that. Pick 52, Arik Holman, forward, Mississippi State, to the Charlotte Hornets. They could use some forward depth I think they could use some depth all around, and Holman is a very solid player. Pick 53, Joshua Reese, guard out of Penn State, to the Jazz. They addressed big man in the first round. Now they're going to go with a wing player, as I think they could use some wing depth as well. Grayson Allen does not look like he will be a very good pro, and doesn't hurt to take a shot here in the second round. Pick 54, Chris Wilkes, shooting guard, UCLA, to the 76ers. Talented 3-and-D guy. There's a decent chance he does not get picked. However, I think the Sixers would love to get some more 3-and-D off their bench. Pick 55, Jalen Hands, point guard, UCLA, to the New York Knicks. Also a pretty decent chance he doesn't get drafted, but the Knicks are going to pick him anyway. Very flashy pick for New York. Very athletic. He can jump higher than he can jump out of a roof, and he is a very bouncy, explosive player. He was a huge letdown at UCLA, but he does have upside. Pick 56, Jalen Horde, forward Wake Forest, to the LA Clippers. I think they could use some forward depth, and Horde is a pretty solid player. Showed some potential with Wake Thee. Pick 57, Taco Fall, center out of UCF, to the New Orleans Pelicans. Phenomenal draft for the Pelicans. Zion Williamson, Taco Fall, and Kyle Guy. That is an extremely fun draft class for the Pelicans. Obviously, we know Taco Fall is 7'6". I think he should get picked. I think he will get picked. And while he is very raw, he does have a ton of potential, mainly because of his height. And I think he could be a solid player in the league. Pick 58, Yovel Jujman, guard out of Israel, to the Golden State Warriors, as they can get themselves a wing. They could use a wing, especially with Klay Thompson not going to be playing next season. Pick 59, Jared Harper, guard from Auburn. Once Chuma Okeke got hurt, Harper was the main option, I felt, for this Tiger team. Really solid player, and I think the Raptors could use an extra guy at point guard. They have Kyle Lowry, they have Fred VanVleet, but it doesn't hurt to get someone else. And then Mr. Irrelevant, the Sacramento Kings are going to go with Simi Shittu out of Vanderbilt. Very solid rebounder. And he does have a ton of potential. Sort of disappointing a little bit this year at Vanderbilt. However, I think he can be a solid interior player on both sides of the floor. So, that'll end my mock draft. Tell me what you agree with, what you disagree with in the comments below. And as always, have a good one.